Hi guys, welcome to yet another episode of Microsoft ERP Beginners Tutorial Series. In the today's episode, we'll be looking into the request for quotation process within D365. That is, we will be creating a request for quotation from purchase requisition document in Microsoft Dynamics 365. So with that note, let's get into the episode. For creating a request for quotation, get into the procurement and sourcing module under the all request for quotation view. If you get in here, you will have an option to click on the new button and create a request for quotation. So when you create a request for quotation directly from here, choosing the purchase type as purchase order, and if I go ahead and create a request for quotation by choosing the warehouse and site, and then send the request for quotation to my vendor, and once I get the response from my vendor, I can go ahead and accept his quote, and then once I accept his quote, and I can convert the request for quote into the purchase order. So that is a simple process of request for quotation, a very straightforward process. You can do that yourself. But in today's scenario, I'm going to create a request for quotation from a purchase requisition and then show you how to handle a request for quotation from the purchase requisition or PR. Okay, so let's get into the purchase requisition record and then let's create a request for quotation from there. So for creating a purchase requisition, I've already covered purchase requisition in a very detailed way. If you missed my episode, I will add the card at the top. So click on the card and you can get into the purchase acquisition episode. You can watch the episode and come back here. So in this section, I will be creating a purchase requisition now. Let's name it as parts order. Click OK. And the purchase acquisition record will be created. And in the purchase acquisition, I'm going to add purchase acquisition lines. That is, I'm going to add some parts. So let me add a couple of newly created parts for this demo. Gearbox that has a category which is engine. And let me add the site and warehouse. And I'm going to add another item. And that's going to be the roof rack. Okay, and again same site warehouse. So for this particular both of the item, I have not provided any trade agreements or any pricing, so the price is 0. And I've also not made any approved vendor for this particular item, so there's no vendor account selected in the purchase acquisition. So I set up the data in this way because I wanted to show you something related with the purchase request for quotation. So let's assume that I'm just a data entry clerk and I'm just a preparer for this record. My job is only to just prepare the data in the system. So on the behalf of the purchase department, my manager is instructing me to create a purchase requisition in the system. So I've just created a purchase requisition and I've added the item number that's been given to me as a line within a purchase requisition. But as a data entry person, I do not know the exact price or even which vendor that I will be going ahead to purchase this particular item, because I need to really find a proper vendor through the RFQ process in order to determine the price and the vendor account. So that's the reason in this scenario, I'm leaving the price and my vendor account blank. So as a preparer, I have created, I have done my job. I have created the record and then I have used my workflow at the top and I'm going to submit it. So just notice that before submitting the workflow, the request for quotation button is disabled. It's grayed out. So the request for quote button will only enable once you submit this particular purchase requisition to your supervisor. Okay, so only when the status of this particular request for quote changes from the draft to in review, the request for quotation button will be enabled. So let's check that out. So now I'm going to submit it to my manager. So now my manager will receive my notification about this particular document. So we can even configure the workflow in such a way that whenever my purchase requisition doesn't have a unit price, or my purchase requisition doesn't have a vendor account filled within a specific line, then the workflow will be automatically triggered to a specific role who is responsible for actually creating the request for quotation. Okay, so we've already discussed about the conditions within a workflow and how to set up a conditions within a workflow. If you missed my workflow episode, do click the above card. That will take you to directly to the episode. You can watch the workflow episode and come back to this episode. So I've already did a demo on how to create a condition. So likewise, you can use the similar logic and create a condition in such a way that whenever there is no vendor or whenever there is no unit price, then this particular PR will be redirected to a specific person to approve. So that person will review this particular PR, and that person who is responsible for creating the RFQ will be seeing that the RFQ is now enabled. So the person can go ahead and now create a request for quote from a purchase requisition. So for creating a request for quote from a purchase requisition, to just give you a recap, you definitely need a workflow, and the workflow needs to be submitted. Once you do that, you can click on the request for quote button, and then the purchase requisition, request for quotation will be created from the purchase requisition. So choose the legal entity. In this case, it's going to be the ADC Motors. I want to include both of this item within my purchase requisition. So this will automatically create a request for quote. I have my request for quote number at the top. We can also see the request for quote number over here. So just click on refresh. You will see the request for quote but over here. Just double click this, it will take you to the request for quote. Or you can even view the request for quote in the all request for quotation section. So you will see the request for quote here. The purchase type is purchase requisition here because we have created the request for quote from the purchase requisition. So the system will automatically take all those. So when you get into the, let me go back to the purchase requisition, and in the purchase requisition, from where we have just created an RFQ, you will find the RFQ number. So I'm going to just double click this from here. So this will redirect me to the RFQ record. So here is my RFQ record, and within my RFQ, already 2 items is added from the PR, that is purchase requisition. So you also see that the price and the vendors are blank even here. So at the moment, I need to, I do not know the price, or I do not know which vendor I will be sending this RFQ document for getting a proper quote. So in order for me to key in the vendor, as we discussed in the previous episode about the vendor evaluation criteria, we need to get into the header section of the RFQ. Under the header section of the RFQ, you can either do the vendor search through the criteria or directly add the vendor. We've already seen this method in the previous episode. So I'm going to directly add the vendor using the add button over here. So let's choose the vendor number 1, and let's add one more vendor. Let's choose vendor number 2. So which means these 2 vendors are going to receive the RFQ from me. That is, we are going to request for quote from these 2 vendors, and we are going to choose one of them who is offering us the best price for the gearbox and the roof rake. Okay, so now we have already included these 2 vendors into the RFQ document, and let's just refresh this once and click on the send button on the top over here. So this will automatically set the status of the request for quote lines to send. Okay, so now I clicked on the send button. It's going to send the request for quote to these 2 vendors, and these are the 2 item lines against those vendors. So click on the OK button. So you will see that the lines will change its status to sent as soon as the RFQ is sent to the vendor. So you can use your alerts, and you can use your business event catalogs and Power Automate to automatically trigger an email notification to your vendor. So the vendor is notified about the potential request for quote which is waiting for his response. Or you can even use the vendor collaboration feature which is available, which is called as a vendor collaboration module over here. So we can provide access to our vendors with a vendor collaboration module, that is access to the vendor collaboration module, where the vendors can view the request for quote and bid for the request for quote from the RFQ sections within the vendor collaboration module. But I do not want to talk about vendor collaboration module now and confuse you. That is for another episode. So for now, let's assume that we are doing everything as a manual process where the email notification is being triggered to the vendor, and vendor will now respond to our email with a proper price. So we can capture all the response from all the vendors using the manage replies button. So let me click on the manage replies button. So in the manage replies section, I can key in the replies from both the vendors. So this is the reply of my vendor number 1. So here under the vendor number 1 section, I can get in here and click on the edit RFQ reply. Okay. So as soon as I click on the edit RFQ reply, I will be able to go ahead and edit the price and key in the price that the vendor has replied me in my email. Okay, so for the gearbox, this particular vendor is okay with the price of around 15,000, let's say, and for the roof rack, this vendor is quoting me with $120 as the price. Okay, so that's the price that I'm keying in as a reply. And not only just the price, it is also possible that you can key in the delivery date. Let's say this vendor is offering me the product to be delivered the next day. The delivery terms and everything can be keyed in as a response from the vendor. And do not forget to hit on the submit button. I forgot to hit on the submit button in the previous request for quote bid. I will pause the video and also submit the other one, but do not forget to submit it. So hit on the submit button for both the replies. Okay, so once you hit on the submit button, it says the bid is successfully submitted. So I've already paused the video and did the same for the other request as well, and I've also submitted it. Okay, so now the status changes to submitted by the purchaser, and this one is as well submitted by the purchaser once you submit the bid. So which means that the vendor has now submitted the replies and the replies are now captured in the RFQ document. So now click on the refresh button. So as soon as you click on the refresh button, you will see that the compare replies menu will enabled. So click on the compare replies option. And in here, you will be able to compare all the replies, even if you have 10 different vendors. At the moment, I only use 2 vendors to keep it simple. But even if it's the 10 different vendors, you will be able to clearly compare the replies from each of them. It is also possible that, for example, this is a header for the vendor 1 and this is the lines specific to the vendor 1. Again, this is a header, which is the total, and this is the line specific to the vendor 2. So here are specific to vendor 1 and these are the data specific to the vendor 2. I'm selecting this particular vendor because the price is low and even the line prices are low. But necessarily I need not always select at the header level. It's also possible that you select this particular line from this particular vendor and you feel that this item price is cheaper in another vendor, whereas in a second line the price is cheaper in another vendor. So which means you can even choose the lines from 2 different vendors. In such cases, once you convert the RFQ into the PO, there will be multiple POs created because RFQ can handle multiple vendors, but the PO can have only one vendor. So when you convert the RFQ into a purchase order directly, then you will have multiple POs created from a RFQ specific to each of the item. But in order not to confuse you, as it's a beginners series, you can try this out. but in my case I'm only going to choose one specific vendor whose prices are low. So I'm going to choose this particular vendor and I'm going to reject the other vendor. So based on the comparison and based on your selection, you may go ahead, choose the vendor and click on the accept button. So now it says accepting the request for quotation. This one 1500 and 120. Yes, this is the vendor account. Yes, correct. So I say okay. And now the system will automatically process my acceptance. And now I will get the another a confirmation for the rejection of this particular vendor. And I say yes, I'm rejecting the other vendor. So which means that now the rejection process is processing. So the system will automatically remove the reply and it will only keep the accepted ones. So now go back and you will see that the pricing over here. Okay, so if I just close this particular window, which is this is the request for quotation window, which if you remember we have created this from the purchase requisition. So let me close the request for quote and go back to the purchase requisition, which is this one. Let me open the purchase requisition. And if I refresh my purchase requisition, I will see that the prices of the selected reply. So if you remember in the beginning of the purchase requisition, we did not had any price populated over here. The prices were 0 and even the vendor account was not selected because I assumed myself to be a preparer. And once you create a purchase, once you create an RFQ from the purchase requisition and later you get the replies and then you select a specific reply and then you go ahead and close your purchase requisition, request for quote and come back to your purchase requisition, you see that it automatically populates with the selected response. So to explain this clearly, so we have first created a purchase requisition, which is this one, and then from the purchase requisition, after the workflow is kicked off, we have created a RFQ, which is that one through this option, and within the RFQ we have sent it to a customer, sorry, to a vendor, and then we got the reply and we accepted only a specific reply, and based on the reply that we have accepted, the net price and the vendor account that we have selected is populated over here. Okay, so just in case, let's say we have accepted this item from this vendor, but the other item was accepted from another vendor, so here the vendor account will also change accordingly, just in case if we did that in the purchase RFQ. Okay, hope you understand my explanation. So yeah, so this is how you create a purchase RFQ from a PR and then approve a RFQ and come back to the PR. So then now from here the process is same. We know what to do. We have already seen the full process of purchase requisition in the previous episode, which is you will go ahead and approve the purchase requisition, and once you approve the purchase requisition, your purchase order will be either automatically created, it is based on the parameter within the purchasing policy, or you might need to manually release your purchase order. So how to release your purchase order manually, and where will be the purchase requisition created and how to release it, all those I've already covered in the previous episode. Do watch the previous episode on the purchase requisition if you missed to watch it. Okay, and in the next episode we will be talking in very detailed way about the purchasing policies and the parameters within the purchasing policies, and in there we will also be discussing about how do we create a purchase order automatically from a purchase from the PR as we have already seen the manual process, we have missed the automatic process. We will cover all those during the discussion about the purchasing policy in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again in yet another brand new episode. Thanks for watching.